Welcome back to the show, everyone. Today, honestly, this is a pretty impactful story. Here's a quote. Effective today, we will be pulling our code repositories offline, discontinuing our Patreon accounts and Discord servers, and soon shutting down our websites. We hope our action will be a small step towards ending piracy of all creators' works. That is a statement from the emulator developer Tropic Haze following a $2.4 million settlement with Nintendo after Nintendo used their legal might to effectively remove one of the biggest Switch and 3DS emulators from existence. And if that sounds like the words of a group that basically were written by a lawyer, I think that's almost certainly because they were. Today, we talk about the death of Citra and Yuzu, something that will actually impact hundreds of thousands, potentially millions of players out there, because these are extremely popular. And while certainly very far from extremely, it has been nice to see that our content's been getting out there lately. A lot of that is because of your support and actually tuning in, but also the people over at Bellular.games who literally make this whole thing possible. The overarching plan that I have is for as much of our financial security and freedom to be from Bellular.games and all the things that we do over there, meaning that we are safe from advertiser BS. We are safe from seasonal downturns like the one that advertising is in right now. Often when our channel has been doing really well, lots of our videos technically lose money, which obviously sucks. So long-term picture, I want things to be sustainable. I want them to be healthy. I want maximum job security and a platform from which we can sustainably grow and make shit better for you. So if you want to support that mission, the link is down below. With that said then, let's go and talk about this whole situation. So, a week ago, Nintendo filed a lawsuit against Tropic Haze, who are the company that creates the emulator Yuzu. Yeah, a week ago, and already we're at a conclusion, obviously because this ended in a settlement. Now, this lawsuit was centered on a very specific reading of the Digital Millennium Copyright Act, that Yuzu essentially was specifically designed, they say, to get around Nintendo's copyright. Specifically, this is by having Yuzu get around the various features Nintendo uses to stop any end user from accessing the security keys that allow a game to be decrypted. And I can just quote here, "Only because Yuzu decrypts a Nintendo Switch game file dynamically during operation, that a game can be played on Yuzu. In other words, without Yuzu's decryption of Nintendo's encryption, unauthorized copies of games could not be played on Android and PC." So it's actually quite interesting here. They're dodging some of the traditional emulator defenses by honing in here on the encryption side of things, which is fairly interesting, I suppose, as a strategy from Nintendo. Now, Yuzu basically, right, in this is being framed as the enabler of the copyright breaches. This is, of course, something that they can be held accountable for under Nintendo's reading of the DMCA. Obviously, what would a judge say? Well, that's not really happened because it ended with a settlement. I mean, yeah, legal stuff was involved, but it wasn't really taken to a proper trial. Now, the claim here is that not only do the Yuzu team provide the software, including compiled versions from behind a Patreon paywall, allegedly, but they also provide a guide on how to get it working, which includes information on how to circumvent the protection on their own console. So that is really part of the killer. So of course, Yuzu will have, their official way of doing things, right? Where, there's going to be stuff based on your own Nintendo Switch. Nintendo's argument here, though, is that the vast majority of users of Yuzu don't do any of that shit. And as an example, they point to places like the very conveniently named Yuzu Pirates subreddit, which has 70,000 people on it. And to go specific on that piracy angle, Nintendo say that they have identified over 1 million downloads of Tears of the Kingdom from pirate websites, and that's before the game actually released, and the claim there is that those sites were advertising the game's functionality on Yuzu. And a bit that certainly doesn't look amazing for the Yuzu team is Nintendo were able to note that Yuzu often does have games optimized for their emulator, like day of release. This happened with Xenoblade Chronicles Definitive Edition. Here's just like straight an image from the Yuzu devs. Now, obviously, if you're a user of Yuzu, this is all awesome. If you're Nintendo and you look at this, this, you can sort of say, well, that's rather sus. And obviously, that's what Nintendo's doing. Anyway, during the period of the leaked Zelda downloads, Nintendo claims that the Patreon membership of Yuzu doubled, and that's because an early access build was believed to be giving people better performance for that game, which, look, let's be real. Did Tears of the Kingdom run particularly well on a Nintendo Switch? No, it didn't. Would I like to play that game? Yes. Am I going to on a Switch? Absolutely not. Therefore, Nintendo have not got my money, and the only conceivable way of actually, for somebody like me playing Tears of the Kingdom, well, it would involve Yuzu, wouldn't it? If I want it to be running with reasonable settings. And it's really examples like that that have led Nintendo to basically, get fighting on this, right? I mean, the Nintendo Switch is nearing the end of its lifespan. Yuzu is expanding over to Android, and of course, Nintendo wants to use this as a big stick to try and scare off other emulators. And part of that is going to be the settlement. So yes, this was settled. It was settled 5 days later. And it's not great for the Yuzu people. I mean, yes, they're stopping, they're pulling things down, but they're also paying $2.4 million of damage. That obviously means absolutely nothing to Nintendo, but Nintendo will be counting on how $2.4 million is quite a lot of dollars to any small teams of developers, so they're probably content with just this settlement actually just acting as something that's, a little bit of a scare tactic, I suppose. Overall, what this means, though, is that both Yuzu and the 3DS emulator Citra, those will cease distribution. And then Tropic Haze themselves released a statement. And really, it's rough because this is the most written and approved by Nintendo's lawyers, thing that I've seen. Basically, right, what it says is that Yuzu was never intended to promote piracy, but due to the way that it was built, other people may have used it for that. And look, that always is going to be the traditional defense. They're saying, yes, us reverse engineering this stuff, that can enable piracy, but the reverse engineering is something that we are legally allowed to do, therefore the emulator's fine. Go seethe, big corporation. That, I suppose, usually was that line. So I suppose with this settlement, they're kind of agreeing that they now do believe, technically, that was happening. And obviously, look, even if Yuzu was completely made only for game preservation, and only for the use by, legal owners of games, we all know what was going on, right? Not going to beat around the bush. Yeah, loads of people were just grabbing Nintendo games. The statement goes on to say that they are disappointed that people have used their software to leak game content prior to release and ruin the experience for legitimate purchasers and fans, which, again, that is a line that very much looks like it was written by a Nintendo lawyer. So, I would say the odds are Nintendo approved this statement, but we are now in a position where the largest Switch and 3DS emulators are gone. Asterisk, because obviously you can't reach into someone's computer and delete something. So yes, Yuzu obviously will live on, but its development team probably won't be doing anything, so it'll be floating about. There were open source repos on GitHub, those have been grabbed, forked. Yuzu will live on. Nintendo will have to play whack-a-mole. They are just hoping that they have set a bit of a precedent here. But of course, less a super firm legal precedent and more of just a spooky, we're going to force you to pay a lot of money in a settlement or else screw you in court. So let's actually get to the legal side of things. Okay, how was Nintendo able to do this? You may say, because you might think emulation is a legal thing. Thing one, none of us here are lawyers, but we can reproduce the opinions of lawyers and talk about them and do our own research. So, in Japan, this is not so much the case, actually. Unauthorized modding of game consoles, save data, or sales of unlicensed codes, that is actually illegal under their copyright law, from what we understand. So, in broad strokes, anything that requires the code of a machine, like the decryption stuff, would fall under that law. So that's Japan, but if we go to the US and broadly the UK, well, yeah, emulation broadly is a legal thing. And there's some interesting stories. As an example, Bleem. Bleem came out in 1999 and it let people play PlayStation games on Dreamcast, and you could even just buy this in a regular store. Yeah, I suppose that would have been a pretty big boon for Dreamcast owners who rapidly found themselves on the losing side of a console war. Anyway, Steve Jobs then promoted the Kinects. Connect X, whatever, on stage in 1999, and that was a software tool that would let people basically play PlayStation games on their Mac. Now, of course, PlayStation were not massive fans of this, even though technically you could say that it meant the entire Mac and Dreamcast player base, so they could in fact buy PlayStation games. Anyway, they tried to shut them down, and they did not win, right? They lost on legal grounds, but they were able to just completely bury Bleem in legal costs, so they went bankrupt. Anyway, in that example, that is stuff that was launched 1 year after the Digital Millennium Copyright Act was first introduced. So basically, to sum this stuff up in simple terms, emulators that reproduce the effect of a piece of hardware, they are a legal thing, as long as they're not reproducing the proprietary code. So basically, if you're getting an emulator and you're using it, for your own purposes and archival, it's basically okay. And Nintendo themselves use emulators. I mean, rather hilariously, it's even seemed that some of Nintendo's re-releases of games have basically just been Nintendo downloading a ROM themselves, or at least that's been the allegation. The thing, though, that is not legal, or at least has not been fully covered by what does allow for emulation in the US and the UK, it is the step where the BIOS files from the console may be needed to get the emulator running, or the distribution of the ROMs by people who don't own the ROMs, right? So if you're, yanking a ROM out of a game you have, then that's kind of different to just obviously if you're downloading a ROM from a website, maybe one that you went to because of Yuzu Pirates, the subreddit, which I'm sure Nintendo basically saw as a lovely, lovely bit of proof. Anyway, Nintendo very much leaning on that interpretation then with the piracy, right? That it's facilitating the distribution of the ROMs, that it's the stuff coming over from the console, right? Basically, they were very focused on the way that Switch games were seemingly appearing on Yuzu day and date with actual Switch releases, and that was suggesting that pirated copies were being used to get the emulation working. And then pretty clearly between what they had from the Yuzu Discord and from other public sources and what they thought they could find if this entered the discovery phase of a trial, basically Nintendo thought that they could just hammer Yuzu into submission. And yeah, they did. From Yuzu's perspective, they will have thought, okay, either we cannot win this because for whatever reason it will be deemed a sort of a violation of the law, or that they just don't think they would in any way be able to fund putting up a legal challenge. So from Nintendo's case, what they haven't done is set a legal precedent. What they have done is set a precedent that they will try to go for you and strong-arm you into a settlement, and that you probably won't want to pony up $2.4 million. Now, the bit that's interesting to me is the why in all of this, right? Because obviously Nintendo know about emulators, right? They know they're a thing. They've even used some of them, it would seem. But what they do need, it seemed, was a reason to actually bother doing something about the emulators. And in this case, it seems that things like the million downloads of Tears of the Kingdom and just stuff in and around Yuzu actually gave them that reason. I mean, even them and emulators, that's been a story recently because Valve, right, they actually went and asked Nintendo if they should allow the Dolphin emulator on their store. And in that case, Nintendo didn't take any legal action, but they were pretty clear with Valve, and Dolphin did not end up being on Steam. And really, when we get to the fundamentals here, it's pretty simple. There's an article here from Ars Technica that's kind of going through it, but essentially the bit that's going to be painful from the emulation side is the encryption key, right? Basically, that is the way to bridge the gap between emulation and piracy from a legal sense. So the running of a Switch game, that's like an emulator, which you can do. Bypassing that encryption, that's the thing you can't do, and that is essentially the legal theory behind what Nintendo were trying to do. The thing is, though, that is a legal theory that was not really tested in the legal system because, well, this is a settlement, which in a way is good news. It does not set a legal precedent. As I said, it sets a precedent that Nintendo will try to hit you with a big stick. So for the fundamentals here, it's pretty damn simple. From Nintendo's perspective, they make their own consoles, they sell games on their console, that's it, that's the deal, nothing else. If you think their games are limited by their hardware, that they run poorly, that you want different settings, that you want mods, that you want some more accessibility settings even, or you just prefer another platform, the official answer is tough shit, That's not the deal. Too bad. For Nintendo, they've got their Switch, they've got new Switch games, and as for their legacy games, which usually would be the target of emulation, well, they view those as an asset that they can take out to sell. And to make this extremely clear, even after the Nintendo 3DS store was shut down, they actually did a firmware update to break some homebrew, right? Now, obviously, from the audience perspective, it's pretty simple. It's the Nintendo sells software to consumers, and that if consumers want to use that software on hardware that they think is better, then that is their right. Emulation, right, that reverse engineering, that's a protected thing. Therefore, they feel they should be able to do that, and even if the user does understand the sort of legal side of the encryption decryption stuff, you could almost see that as a annoying technicality in the law that's kind of getting around the spirit of things. Even if you could say, well, come on, it's so that we can play our own games. We can slurp them off the little cards and play them on our PC or our Steam Deck. But, no, we know that is also the thing that allows the games to be easily pirated, and that's where, obviously Nintendo comes in. And I think this is something that's far more important now than it really ever has been. Because look, you've been able to get maybe off AliExpress. There's actually loads of companies doing these, loads of great YouTubers who cover them. Essentially, $70, $80 little gaming handhelds that are incredible little emulation boxes. People love using PlayStation Vitas for emulation. You've got stuff like, say, the Odin. And then, of course, more recently, we've got all of the Z1 Extreme gaming PCs. We've got the Steam Deck as well. And funny on that, Valve accidentally showed, it would seem, on some of their own assets, Yuzu running on a Steam Deck, which was kind of hilarious. So, I actually would think, though, that this is where the piracy will be directly competing with them. Right now, who's really going to buy a Switch? And if you know that Yuzu's there and it works really well, and if you can just afford a little bit more money to get a Steam Deck or a Z1 Extreme thing like a ROG Ally, well, if that's also just going to be a functional, like a full Nintendo Switch, probably not full, but if it can play Switch games, then that is going to be something that Nintendo sees as direct competition to them from the pirated market. Whereas at least in the past, if it's just people playing a bunch of SNES games, or even a DS game, that'll suck for Nintendo, but they're probably not going to be spooked by it. When it is day and date brand new games, they're probably going to be spooked by it. Hence Tears of the Kingdom being used as the example. Even though, of course, and this is completely legally irrelevant, I would certainly say I think Tears of the Kingdom, if it's experienced at a higher resolution, better frame rate, more stable frame rate, well, I think that means it literally plays more smoothly. I think that makes it literally a better game. But obviously, Nintendo don't give a shit. And even on the angle of the preservation of games, well, Nintendo doesn't have to give a shit about that if they don't want to. Their take on preservation is that they can re-release Luigi's Mansion 2 on Switch later this year, or, maybe do some eShop thing with a ROM. Otherwise, though, Nintendo are going to build in every technical feature and software trick to ensure that their software can only be played on their machines and not on legally emulated versions of their machines. Those legally emulated versions of their machines can exist, but they will do something where they can legally say, nope, you're actually not allowed to do that. That's piracy. And then they can try to go and get you. Obviously, for audiences, though, we just want our games. We want them to not go away, and ideally, we'd like them in multiple places. For preservation, Yuzu is actually incredible. I mean, it is a set of tools that does preserve the history of games by making sure the Nintendo stuff can run on anything. Their idea is the reverse engineering is legal, and that just means that people can run the games that they own. That's very much the simple, charitable way of putting it. Of course, though, for others, it's nothing to do with preservation. They just want to play Tears of the Kingdom now, or maybe mod it, or add accessibility features, whatever it may be. And of course, we do get to a fundamental thing where 1 million downloads of Tears of the Kingdom before release, that's not going to directly translate into lost sales. Loads of people will have done that who will have just bought the game anyway, right? That's one thing. How many people who emulated that on a PC would have bought it on Switch, right? Probably not a massive amount, and Nintendo don't even offer it for sale on the PC. So anything that says oh, that's 1 million sales we lost, that's obviously a complete load of bollocks. But I think that now with the likes of the Steam Deck taking off, that there is a thing that absolutely kicks the shit out of a Switch. If it defeats a Switch on every level, including playing Switch games, Nintendo are going to see that as a problem. What I think this does do, though, is send up a beacon that illuminates a whole situation for Nintendo and their lawyers, especially when pirating just just results in a better experience for their games. I mean, if you thought that getting the pirated version for Denuvo to not be there, if you thought that was a relevant thing, my God, look at the difference between a pirated and non-pirated version of, Tears of the Kingdom, right? Overall, I mean, look, my view is legal emulation, that should be protected, that should be expanded. As an example here, the loss of Citra sucks. It sucks because 3DS emulation is actually pretty challenging. That just sucks. And of course, piracy, that's never going to be eliminated. As, of course, Gabe said, in many ways, it is a service problem. It's also a big old game of cat and mouse, and how many people who pirate a game basically wouldn't be able to buy it, or end up pirating the game, and then later on, when they do have money, end up spending some money, right? You talk to a lot of game developers, and a lot of actual game devs don't really care that much about piracy. If your game is there on Steam and people go and pirate it, like, how many of those people would have actually bought the game? And how many of those people would have bought the game, at full price versus just like something gray and sketchy in a CD key website? So I don't know. I don't think the developers are humongously concerned about that. Of course, though, if you're a big first party like Nintendo, that's a bit different. Ultimately, then, this is a win that Nintendo have scored. They have not set a precedent. Protections for reverse engineering do exist. Emulators do fall under them. It's a question of, do those technicalities like the encryption stuff, well, do those actually end up counting? Who knows? We don't have legal protection for that sort of thing. One thing, though, that I think will be absolutely happening is other emulators trying to tidy up their own arrangements to ensure that they are as watertight as they can possibly be, especially in terms of framing. Because I think the likes of the Patreon movements with Tears of the Kingdom, the existence of Yuzu Pirate subreddit, that stuff probably did material damage to Yuzu's sense of security, leading to them taking the route of, doing the settlement rather than letting that whole thing go to trial. Overall, though, there does need to be legal protections for the field of emulation. I think that is important in the long term. Can we think about this not in terms of the next 3 years of profit, but in terms of 30 years, 40 years, 50 years, 60 years? How many amazing movies, real pioneering, groundbreaking shit from say the 1920s, how much of that is just lost because it was never preserved? In a way, while hardware may die, software emulation keeps this stuff alive, and alive in a way where it is bloody hard to kill. As Nintendo have found out, because, yeah, there's forks of Yuzu everywhere, I'm sure. We can't just have preservation be something that the megacorps get to completely control. So I think those legal protections for emulation are important. Perhaps we need to deal with those kind of in-the-middle temperament things like the encryption situation. What goes on there? How do you actually deal with that? And I mean, look, the argument that being illegal, I mean, there's definitely a question to be had about piracy here, but I mean, this is ultimately not really one that this entire situation has answered. Basically, nothing's been answered. It's just people have been spooked. That's kind of the story. So that's it for me. Tune in tomorrow. We'll be going through all of the games coming up this month. There are quite a lot of bangers, including one game that I'm really excited for that I only just learned about. So that's all pretty good news. And if you want to support our team, you can check out Bellular.games. Over there, we are publishing every weekday loading screen. Our videos go up there, early access, ad-free, all that good stuff. And it is the #1 way to support what we do. Thank you, and I'll see you again tomorrow.